loveliest listener of the ton. If you have never been hated by people who have never met you, you have never been truly introduced to London. They hated Miss Seraphina Blythe on principle. Not because she had done anything wicked, but because 5 years ago, when the most eligible gentleman in England died in a locked music room, society required a woman to blame. And Seraphina, quiet, clever, and inconveniently present, had been the easiest shape to turn into a villain. So the ton did what it always did. It made a story. A tragic, delicious story about a girl with pretty hands and dangerous ambition who must have wanted something badly enough to kill for it. The truth was far less theatrical. The truth was that Seraphina had been 17, standing outside the music room with a violin case in her hand, and she had heard a body fall behind the door. And then the door had opened, and she had seen Lord Julian Marrow, pale as wax, collapsed at the pianoforte. And beside him, on the polished black lid, was a scrap of paper, torn from a letter, smeared with blood. Seraphina grabbed it before anyone else could, because she'd recognized the handwriting instantly. Her mother's. And that single instinct, quick, desperate, loving, had been the moment her life ended. Because when the physicians declared Julian dead, and the magistrate arrived, and the ton began to gather like carrion birds, Seraphina realized the most terrifying thing. That blood-stained scrap meant her mother had been in the room, or had been meant to be. And London did not forgive women who were near sin. London preferred women who were ornamental. Seraphina had never been ornamental, so she vanished before they could destroy her completely. She spent 5 years in Bath, living under the smallest name possible, Miss Sarah Bell, teaching music to girls who cried over scales, and dreaming of a life that didn't require permission. It almost worked. She almost became no one. Until the letter arrived in winter, cream paper, black seal, and a crest she remembered too well. A stag over crossed swords, the House of Ashcombe. The hand inside her envelope was unfamiliar, male, clean, disciplined. Miss Blythe, you do not know me, but I have your name in my possession, and I suspect you have a secret that belongs to mine. Return to London. I will meet you at St. James's Park on Thursday, noon. If you do not come, I will assume guilt is why you hide. Lord Wraith Ashcombe. Seraphina stared at the signature until her lungs hurt. Ashcombe. The family Julian Marrow was due to marry into, the family that gained everything when Julian died, the family London said had suffered so nobly. Her stomach turned, because the letter was a trap, and worse, something in her wanted to spring it. Not because she was brave, because she was tired of being hunted by a story she never wrote. So Seraphina returned to London. London greeted her the way it greeted all returning ghosts, with eager cruelty. The first whisper came before she even stepped from her carriage. Blythe, isn't that the girl from the Marrow death? Lord, yes, poor Julian. They said she had blood on her gloves. No, that was the other one. Who cares? She looks guilty. Seraphina walked through it all with her chin lifted. Not because she felt strong, because she knew what would happen if she looked weak. London didn't comfort weakness, it collected it. St. James's Park was gray with winter. The lake looked like cold metal. The trees were stripped bare like a threat. At precisely noon, a man approached along the path with a sort of controlled stride that suggested he had never once been forced to apologize. He was tall, dark-haired, dressed simply but expensively, his gloves immaculate, his eyes the color of storm water. And when he stopped in front of Serafina, he did not smile. He looked at her like a man evaluating a weapon. "Miss Blythe," Serafina inclined her head. "Lord Ashcombe." His gaze flicked briefly to her hands, her posture, her face. "You were very difficult to find," he said. Serafina's voice remained calm. That was the point. Interest moved behind his eyes. "Good," he said softly. "Then you understand why I wrote." Serafina's heart did not flutter, it clenched. "Why did you?" she asked. Lord Ralph Ashcombe reached into his coat and withdrew a folded object. Not a letter, a music sheet. Old, yellowed, and at the top in elegant script, "Julian Marrow's Requiem, dedicated to S.B." Serafina's blood went cold. He watched her reaction with clinical precision. "You recognize it," he said. Serafina swallowed. "That's impossible. It was found in my mother's desk 2 weeks ago, hidden beneath the false bottom." Serafina's throat tightened. "Your mother was Julian's intended," she whispered. Ralph's gaze sharpened. "Yes," he said, "and Julian died in our house." Serafina forced herself to breathe. "What do you want?" she asked. Ralph stepped closer, voice low enough to feel dangerous. "I want the truth," he said, "because someone is trying to kill my mother, slowly, politely, and with perfect manners." Serafina went still. "What do you mean?" Ralph's jaw tightened. "She has been poisoned," he said, as if stating a fact that made him sick. "In small doses, enough to weaken, not enough to prove." Serafina's stomach dropped. "And you think I'm involved?" she asked, her voice tightening. Ralph's gaze held hers. "I think," he said quietly, "you were blamed for a death you didn't cause." Serafina blinked. It felt like stepping on ice that should have cracked. "Why would you think that?" she whispered. Ralph didn't answer immediately. Instead, he said the sentence that changed the ground under her feet. "Because the night Julian died, I was the one who locked the music room." Serafina's vision narrowed. "What?" Ralph's voice stayed steady, but his eyes darkened with something like self-disgust. "I was 19, he said. "I found Julian with a letter in his hand. He was shaking. He told me he was going to ruin my mother." Serafina's lips parted. "Ruin her?" Ralph's gaze flicked away, then back. "He said she'd be disgraced by morning," Ralph said quietly. "He said she'd never recover, and he smiled like it pleased him." Serafina felt heat rise in her chest. Julian Narrow, the Ton's darling, wasn't supposed to have sharp edges. But Serafina remembered his charm. Charm often hid teeth. Ralph continued, voice lower now. "I locked the door because I wanted 5 minutes, he said. 5 minutes to convince him to stop." Serafina's heart pounded. "And then he died," she whispered. Ralph held her gaze. "And then he died," he confirmed. "And when the door opened, you were there." Serafina's fingers went numb. "So London blamed me," she said, voice tight, "because you couldn't admit—" "Because my mother would have been destroyed," Ralph said, blunt and bitter, "and because I thought you would disappear." Serafina's breath caught. "You thought I would sacrifice myself." Ralph's silence was the answer. Serafina stared at him, rage and disbelief colliding so hard she almost laughed. "You're asking for my help now," she said softly, "after you let the Ton carve me into a monster." Ralph's jaw tightened. "Yes," he said, "because I deserve your hatred, and because you're the only one who understands what it means to be ruined by a lie." Serafina's throat burned. She wanted to slap him. She wanted to cry. She wanted to do something unladylike enough to feel real. Instead, she said the coldest truth she had. "I will help your mother," she said, "not for you, because no woman deserves to be quietly murdered in a drawing room." Rafe's eyes flickered. Relief, then something worse, hope. "And when we're done," Serafina added softly, "you will give me my name back." Rafe nodded once. "You'll have more than that." Serafina's voice didn't soften. "We'll see." Ashcombe House was beautiful in the way a sword was beautiful, polished, lethal, and designed for power. Lady Ashcombe was not the terrifying Duchess Serafina had imagined. She was pale, elegant, sitting too still in a chair by the window, as if movement cost too much. Her eyes, however, were sharp as needles. When Serafina was announced, Lady Ashcombe's gaze fixed on her like a recognition. "Miss Blythe," Lady Ashcombe said softly. Serafina curtsied. "My lady?" Lady Ashcombe studied her face. Then she did the last thing Serafina expected. She smiled. Not kindly, not cruelly, like a woman seeing a ghost she thought she'd buried. "So," Lady Ashcombe murmured, "they sent you back to me at last." Serafina went cold. "What do you mean?" she asked. Lady Ashcombe's fingers tightened on her teacup. "I begged Julian to leave you out of it," she said quietly, "but he always did enjoy making women pay for men's mistakes." Rafe's posture stiffened. Serafina's stomach twisted. "You knew," Serafina whispered. "You knew I was blamed." Lady Ashcombe's eyes flickered. Guilt, anger, calculation. "I knew, and I was powerless to stop it." Serafina laughed once sharp. "Powerless?" she repeated. "In a house like this?" Lady Ashcombe's gaze went hard. "You think wealth is power?" she said softly. "Wealth is only a cage with better upholstery." Serafina's chest tightened. Lady Ashcombe leaned forward, voice dropping. "Tell me," she said, "did you take the scrap of paper from the pianoforte that night?" Serafina's blood went ice cold. "Yes," she whispered, "I did." Rafe's head snapped toward her. "You never told anyone," Lady Ashcombe said softly. Serafina's voice trembled with old pain. "It was my mother's handwriting," she said. I thought she'd be accused." Lady Ashcombe's eyes softened just slightly. "And she would have been," she said. Silence. Then Lady Ashcombe said carefully, "Your mother wrote that note to save you." Serafina's breath caught. "What?" Lady Ashcombe's voice stayed low. "She knew Julian planned to force you into a situation you could not escape," she said. "She asked me for help. That note was an arrangement, an escape." Serafina's heart hammered. "Then why was it bloody?" she whispered. Lady Ashcombe's gaze slid toward Rafe, and something unspoken passed between them. Serafina saw it, a private agreement, a buried truth. "Because," Lady Ashcombe said softly, "that was the night someone tried to kill me for the first time." That was when Serafina understood. Julian's death had not been the beginning. It had been a cover. Someone had used the chaos to hide a quieter crime, an attempted murder in a room full of music and witnesses. And Serafina, standing outside the door with a violin case, had been the perfect scapegoat. Her rage shifted. It became sharper, more precise.
Rafe watched her like a man realizing she was more dangerous than he expected. "What do you remember?" Serafina asked. Lady Ashcomb's fingers tightened. "I remember Julian shouting," she said. "I remember the door locking." Rafe flinched. "I remember the taste of almonds," Lady Ashcombe said, continuing, voice steady. "And I remember thinking, how clever, how polite, poison in a genteel house." Serafina swallowed hard. "And now it's happening again," she whispered. Lady Ashcombe nodded once. "It is," she said, "and I believe the person doing it is in my own family." The room went still. Rafe's voice was tight. "Who?" Lady Ashcombe looked directly at Serafina. "That," she said softly, "is why you're here." That night, Serafina wandered the long corridors of Ashcombe House, unable to sleep. Her old shame was being rewritten into something else. Not innocence, not redemption, purpose. And purpose was terrifying. She found herself in the music room where Julian Marrow had died. The pianoforte sat in the corner like a memory, and on the stand, waiting like a dare, was Julian's requiem, dedicated to S.B. Serafina's fingers touched the first note. Then a voice spoke from the doorway. "You still play?" Rafe stood there, coat removed, sleeves rolled to his forearms. Without the armor of society, he looked younger, more human, more dangerous. Serafina didn't turn. "I teach," she said softly. "Playing is for people who can afford to feel." Rafe crossed the room, slow. "You can afford it," he murmured. "You just refuse." Serafina's throat tightened. "I refused because London wanted me ruined, and you let it." Rafe's voice went rough. "I did, and I have hated myself for it every day since." Serafina turned then, eyes bright. "You don't get absolution because you regret," she said quietly. Rafe nodded. "I know," he murmured. "That's why I'm not asking for absolution." He stepped closer. "Then why are you here?" Serafina demanded. Rafe's gaze flicked to her mouth, then back to her eyes like a man punishing himself for wanting. "Because," he said softly, "every time you look at me, you look like you're deciding whether I deserve to live." Serafina's breath caught. "And what have you decided?" he asked. Serafina's voice dropped. "I decided," she said, "that I won't let you distract me from what I came here to do." Rafe's mouth twitched. "That sounded like a warning," he murmured. "It is." Rafe leaned in, close enough for Serafina to feel the heat of him. "Then give me another," he said. Serafina's pulse jumped, furious at her own body, so she gave him the only warning she could trust, the truth. "I cannot love a man who benefits from my ruin," she whispered. Rafe's eyes darkened. "Then don't love me yet," he murmured. "Let me earn something first." Serafina's chest ached, and to her horror, she realized he meant it. That was the most dangerous kind of man, the kind who would wait. The next day brought the first public blow, a ball at Ashcombe House, hosted by the Duchess herself, because Lady Ashcombe believed in confronting poison with chandeliers. The Ton arrived hungry. They always arrived hungry. Serafina walked into the ballroom on Rafe's arm, and the room made the sound it always made when a scandal becomes visible, a collective inhale. Whispers hissed like steam. "That's her, the Blythe girl, the one from Julian's death. Why is she here? Lord Ashcombe is mad." Then, like a blade sliding from silk, another voice appeared behind her, soft, familiar, lethal. "Cecily." No, not Cecily. Serafina's stomach dropped. because only one person in England said her name like that, her sister. Seraphina turned slowly and saw Arabella Blythe, alive, glittering, and wearing a new surname like a weapon. Lady Arabella Vane, married, respected, and smiling as though nothing had ever happened. Rafe's grip tightened slightly. He hadn't known. Seraphina's voice was steady only because her anger kept it upright. "You're late," Seraphina said. Arabella's smile widened. "I've always been the interesting one," she purred. "You always were the dutiful one." Seraphina felt the room lean in, because London adored sisters. Sisters meant comparison. Sisters meant blood. Sisters meant a private war fought in public. Arabella's gaze flicked to Rafe. "Oh," she murmured, sweet as poison. "A new protector. How charming." Seraphina's eyes narrowed. "You came for something," she said softly. Arabella's smile didn't change. "Of course I did," she replied. "I came to keep you quiet." And then the first twist struck. Arabella leaned in, close enough for Seraphina to smell expensive perfume. "Julian didn't die because of you," she whispered. "He died because of me." Seraphina went still. Her blood turned to ice. Arabella's eyes glittered. "I slipped into the music room before you arrived," she murmured. "I heard him threatening Lady Ashcombe. I saw the poison he meant for her." Seraphina's voice came out strangled. "You poisoned him." Arabella smiled. "No," she whispered. "I swapped the cups."
Seraphina's world narrowed. Arabella's voice stayed gentle, almost affectionate. "I saved a lady," she said. "I saved our mother's chance at protection." Seraphina's hands went cold. "And then you let me be blamed?" Seraphina whispered. Arabella's eyes flashed sharp. "You were blamed because you were there," she hissed. "And I couldn't be, not if I wanted to survive, not if I wanted to marry well." Seraphina's throat burned. "You ruined me so you could rise," she said, voice shaking with truth. Arabella's smile softened into something almost pitying. "Don't be dramatic," she murmured. "I thought you'd vanish and become someone else. That's what women do." Seraphina stared at her sister, beautiful, ruthless, alive. And she realized the second twist. Arabella hadn't returned out of guilt. Arabella had returned because someone was close to exposing her, and Arabella needed a scapegoat again. Rafe watched Seraphina's face change. "What did she say?" he asked, low. Seraphina didn't answer him, because the ballroom's air shifted again, because Lady Ashcombe stood at the top of the stairs, pale and poised, and she raised her glass. "My friends," she said, voice carrying, "I have endured enough whispers." The room stilled. Lady Ashcombe looked straight at Arabella. "And I have seen enough women destroyed to keep men comfortable," she continued. Arabella's smile faltered. Lady Ashcombe lifted a letter. "A confession," she said softly, "delivered this morning." Arabella's eyes went wide, because she recognized her own handwriting. Lady Ashcombe's gaze did not waver. "It describes the night Julian Marrow died and the woman who ensured he did." Arabella's face went white. The ton held its breath. Seraphina's heart thundered. Rafe's hand found hers, steadying, not claiming. Lady Ashcombe turned her eyes to Seraphina then. "And it also explains," she said, voice gentler,
why Miss Seraphina Blythe was blamed. Seraphina's breath caught. London's gaze pinned her, and Seraphina realized the highest, most dangerous moment of all. This was the instant London would decide whether she was monster or martyr. Seraphina stepped forward, not because she wanted their mercy, because she was done with their story. She lifted her chin and spoke clearly. I did not kill Julian Marrow, but I have been punished as if I had. Whispers rippled. Seraphina continued, voice tightening with controlled fury. And now you will watch the truth, she said, because I am finished being silent for your comfort. Arabella's eyes flashed with panic. She lunged fast toward Seraphina, like a woman who knew the only way to survive was to destroy first. Wraith moved instinctively, but Seraphina moved faster. She stepped aside, let Arabella's momentum carry her, and in one swift motion, elegant, brutal, she ripped Arabella's jeweled bracelet free. It snapped, scattering diamonds across the ballroom floor like shattered stars. Gasps erupted. Arabella froze, humiliated, trembling with rage. Seraphina held up the bracelet. Inside, threaded through the clasp, was a tiny folded scrap of paper, the original blood-stained fragment, the one Seraphina had taken 5 years ago. Her mother's handwriting. Arabella's face drained of color, because Seraphina finally understood. Arabella hadn't returned to keep Seraphina quiet. She'd returned to retrieve the evidence. Seraphina's voice was soft. You've been carrying this all along, she murmured. Arabella's mouth opened. No sound came. Lady Ashcombe's voice cut through the ballroom like steel. Guards. Arabella's knees went weak. London, hungry London, watched her fall. That night, after Arabella was taken away in disgrace, Seraphina stood in the music room again, shaking, not from fear, from the sheer violence of being seen. Wraith entered quietly, closing the door behind him. He didn't speak at first. He just looked at her like she was something fragile he wasn't allowed to touch without permission. Seraphina's laugh cracked. You wanted truth, she whispered. There it is. Wraith's voice was rough. I wanted you free, he said. Seraphina turned toward him, eyes bright. And what am I now? She asked. Wraith took one slow step closer. A woman London can't control, and the woman He stopped, swallowed, as if even saying it would be a kind of theft. Seraphina's throat tightened. Say it, she whispered. Wraith's eyes burned. I want you, he said, not as penance, not as a plan, as truth. Seraphina's breath trembled. And what if I can't forgive you? She whispered. Wraith nodded once. Then I'll still earn you, he said, because you should never have been forced to survive alone. Seraphina stared at him, a man who could have taken, choosing to wait. It undid something in her she hadn't realized was still holding. She crossed the space between them and pressed her palm to his chest, feeling his heartbeat steady and real. This isn't love yet, she whispered. Rafe's voice dropped. No, he said, it's the beginning. Seraphina rose on her toes and kissed him, once, careful, fierce. A kiss that wasn't surrender, a kiss that was choice. When she pulled back, her voice shook. If you ever make me small, she murmured, I will leave. Rafe's mouth twitched. soft, broken devotion. "Good," he said. "Then I'll spend my life making you bigger." In the weeks that followed, the Ton tried to rewrite the scandal in its favor. It always did. They pretended they had always suspected Arabella. They pretended they had always pitied Serafina. They pretended they were shocked by poison in a polite house. But Serafina didn't care anymore, because she was no longer asking London for permission to be whole. She had her name back, she had her mother safe, and she had Rafe, dangerous, controlled Rafe, learning day by day how to love without owning. On the first day Serafina walked into a ballroom without flinching, a lady hissed behind her fan. "Murderess." Serafina turned calmly. "Almost," she said, "but I learned restraint." The woman went pale. Rafe's hand found Serafina's at her side, light, respectful. "Shall we dance?" he asked, not claiming, only asking. Serafina's mouth curved. "Try to keep up," she murmured. And as they stepped into the waltz, London watched, furious and fascinated, because the most scandalous thing a woman can do is not to be desired, it is to be unafraid. Loveliest listener of the Ton, sometimes the story isn't about being rescued. Sometimes it's about learning you were never meant to be anyone's sacrifice.
Loveliest listener of the Ton, Ruin arrives in velvet slippers, quiet, polite, and already inside the house before anyone thinks to bolt the door. For Elowen Hartwell, Ruin arrived on an ordinary Tuesday in the plainest possible way. A letter, cream paper, black seal, a crest stamped so deeply the wax looked bruised. Her father held it as though it might bite. The fire in the grate had burned itself down to embers. Coal was too dear for long flames now. Everything dear had become too dear lately. Meat, ribbons, pride. Elowen stood by the window watching winter rain trail down the glass like slow tears. Her father cleared his throat. "Elowen," he said, voice rough. "It is Lord Ashburn." Elowen turned slowly. She had heard the name, of course. Everyone had. Lord Alistair Ashbourne was not merely old money. He was the sort of old money that had been cruel long enough to become tradition. A widower, a landowner, a man spoken of the way people spoke of storms and illness, quietly and only when necessary. Her mother's voice came softly, as though softness could soften the meaning. "He has requested your hand." Elowen did not immediately respond. She looked at the room first, the patched drapes, the cold fireplace, the silver candlesticks that were not silver anymore, just polished tin pretending. She looked at the corner where her younger brother's boots sat, worn thin at the soles. Then she looked at her parents. "And if I refuse?" Elowen asked, soft. Her father finally met her eyes. "Then we are finished," he said. "We will be turned out, and no one will help us, not now. Not now. Not with the rumors." Their family's ruin had come from no tragedy, not even from illness. It had come from ordinary human weakness, bad investments, a taste for drink, a pride too stubborn to admit they were sinking until the water reached their throats. Her mother's lips trembled. "He is old. He will not. He cannot have many years left. Perhaps you will be safe. Perhaps you will even be free." Free, Elowen thought, as though freedom were something one received from a coffin. Elowen's throat tightened, but her voice didn't shake. "When?" Elowen asked. Her father swallowed. 4 weeks, he said. "He insists on speed." 4 weeks to become someone's salvation. 4 weeks to stop being her own. Elowen looked at her mother, then her father.
These were the people who had once taught her to sing and read poetry, who had once sworn she would marry for love, who now stood before her like strangers asking a price. Very well, Elowen thought, if she must be spent, she would not be spent quietly. I will marry Lord Ashburn, Elowen said. Her father exhaled like a drowning man hauled onto shore. Her mother crossed the room and kissed Elowen's forehead as if she were blessing a sacrifice. "You are saving us," her mother whispered. Elowen did not correct her. She could not bear to say the truer thing. "You are losing me." The 4 weeks passed like a slow tightening around Elowen's throat. London continued as it always did, dinners, dances, gossips served on silver trays, while Elowen's world narrowed to fittings and letters and the careful, humiliating work of preparing to be purchased with dignity. Lord Ashburn's solicitor came twice with papers that smelled of sealing wax and finality. A new dress arrived each week, delivered with Ashburn's seal, and no note beyond, "For your comfort." Comfort was never a gift from men like that. It was a leash disguised as velvet. Elowen tried the gowns on and stared at herself in the mirror. Fine silk, frost-colored lace, pearls that looked like trapped moonlight. She looked like a girl being prepared for a portrait, beautiful, obedient, and already dead inside. Her mother watched with a brightness that was too sharp to be real. "You look like a duchess already," her mother whispered. "A duchess," Elowen repeated, tasting the word, "or a display." At the season's final winter ball, held in a townhouse so gilded it seemed to sweat gold, Elowen stood near the refreshment table as women smiled at her with sympathy sharp enough to draw blood. "Poor Miss Hartwell," whispered one behind a fan, "sold to Ashbourne. Imagine it."
"He's old enough to be her grandfather," murmured another. "At least he'll keep her quiet," said a third voice, soft and cruel. Elowen did not turn. She had learned to let cruelty pass through her like air. Then the room shifted, not with music, with a tension, a hush, as though someone had opened the door and let winter into the ballroom. The butler announced, voice clipped, "Rowan." Only one name, no title, no pedigree announced, just Rowan. And yet the room reacted as if a prince had entered. Elowen's breath caught, just slightly. Rowan had no title, which meant, in the eyes of the ton, he had no right to command a room. And yet he did. He entered with the quiet assurance of a man who refused to apologize for existing. He was perhaps 27, tall, dark-haired, dressed in black without unnecessary ornament. His gaze swept the room once, watchful, assessing, and landed on Elowen as though he had been looking for something and finally found it. Whispers rose immediately. "That's him!" "Who?" "Rowan, the man who builds the precision instruments for the Navy. They say he turned down a knighthood. They say Lord Ashbourne hates him. They say Lord Ashbourne should fear him." Elowen didn't understand why she was watching him so closely. She only knew she was. Rowan crossed the room, not hurried, not hesitant, straight toward her. He stopped before her and bowed with the kind of restraint that was almost insolent. "Miss Hartwell," he said. His voice was calm, but it carried, like a closing door. Elowen inclined her head. "Sir." Rowan's gaze held hers. "You're engaged," he said. Elowen's jaw tightened. "Yes." "And you're not happy," Rowan replied, as if stating a fact. Elowen's fingers tightened around her fan. "You don't know me." Rowan's mouth curved faintly, not quite a smile, a private thought. "I know enough," he said. "You stand like someone being told to surrender with grace." Elowen's throat went tight. Before she could respond, Rowan did something outrageous. He offered his hand. "Dance with me," he said. Elowen's pulse spiked. "I cannot." "You can," Rowan said calmly. "You simply believe you're not allowed."
Across the ballroom, Elowen saw a tall, older man watching from the shadows, silver hair, stern posture, eyes cold as cut stone. Lord Alistar Ashbourne. His gaze was possessive, as if Elowen were already property. Elowen should have refused Rowan. She should have been proper. Instead, something in her, something furious and long unheard, rose like flame. She placed her hand in Rowan's, and London leaned forward delighted. Rowan danced like a man who understood control but didn't need to show it. His hand at Elowen's waist was proper, restrained, and yet she felt the heat of it like a brand. "You shouldn't marry Ashbourne," Rowan murmured as they turned. Elowen's lips tightened. "And you shouldn't speak as though you have the right to advise me." Rowan's gaze sharpened. "I advise because I know," he said. Elowen swallowed. "What do you know?" Rowan's voice lowered. "What kind of men collect wives the way they collect estates, and what kind of men do not forgive a woman for being human." Elowen felt her chest tighten. "Why do you care?" she asked. Rowan's eyes held hers. "Because I once saw you outside St. Martin's giving your gloves to a shivering child. You didn't know anyone watched. You didn't do it for applause." Elowen's breath caught. "You watched me?" Rowan's mouth curved faintly. "I see most things," he murmured. "It's an occupational habit." "What occupation?" Elowen demanded. Rowan hesitated. Brief. Telling. "Precision," he said. "A world where one wrong cog ruins an entire mechanism." The music ended. Rowan guided Elowen toward the edge of the ballroom. "Be careful," he said softly. "Ashbourne doesn't like anyone interfering with what he believes belongs to him." Elowen forced calm. "And do you like interfering?" Rowan's gaze turned dangerous. "I dislike watching good women become repairs for broken men." Before Elowen can respond, the air shifted. Lord Ashbourne approached, polite, cold, perfect. "Rowan," said Ashbourne, voice smooth as steel. "You're bold." Rowan didn't flinch. "Honesty often looks like boldness to men who prefer silence." Gasps flickered through the crowd. Ashbourne's eyes slid to Elowen. "You're pale," he observed, as though her color inconvenienced him. Elowen met his gaze. It is remarkable how men notice a woman's complexion only when it reflects poorly on them. A flicker crossed Ashbourne's face. Interest, irritation, something colder. "Good," he murmured, as if she were being measured. Then he offered Elowen his arm. "You travel north 3 days," he said quietly. "The wedding will be held at Ashbourne House, privately." Elowen's stomach tightened. 3 days to prepare, travel, and surrender. Rowan watched Elowen leave, expression unreadable, but Elowen felt, without understanding why, that he wasn't done with her. Not yet. The carriage arrived exactly 3 mornings later. Elowen's mother hugged her so tightly, Elowen felt her ribs ache. "You are saving us," her mother whispered. Elowen climbed into the carriage without looking back. If she looked back, she might not have found the strength to leave. The journey took 3 days. London softened into countryside, countryside hardened into moorland. The air grew colder, villages grew sparse, silence grew heavier. On the 2nd day, Elowen saw a rider through the rain-smeared window, a black coat, a familiar posture, a horse moving like a shadow. Rowan. He rode parallel at a distance, never close enough to be accused, never far enough to vanish, as if he were keeping watch. Elowen pressed her gloved hand to the glass, heart tight. Then he turned away and disappeared into the fog. Ashbourne House was not a home, it was a statement. Stone walls, tall windows, an iron gate that creaked like it remembered every woman who'd crossed it. Inside, cold grandeur, dark wood, portraits of men who looked born to command and women who looked born to endure. Elowen was shown to rooms so beautiful they felt dangerous. A housekeeper greeted her, stern, older, eyes sharp. "The wedding will be in 2 days," she said. Elowen's pulse jumped. 2 days? "His lordship prefers it swift," she replied. "And afterwards?" Elowen asked softly. The housekeeper paused. "Afterwards, you will learn how to be quiet." That night, Elowen could not sleep. The house felt like it was listening, and then she heard it. Tick, tick, tick. A faint rhythm, delicate and steady. She followed it down a corridor, past doors that looked like they hadn't opened in years. One door stood slightly ajar. Inside was a small room filled with clocks, and kneeling by lamplight was a man with dark hair and sleeves rolled to the forearm, hands working with careful precision. He looked up. Gray-blue eyes. Elowen froze before she could stop herself. "Rowan," she whispered before she could stop herself. The man's mouth twitched faintly, not a smile, something close. "I told you to be careful in this house," he said quietly. Elowen stepped inside, pulse loud. "What are you doing here?" He didn't answer directly. Instead, he rose, carefully. Elowen noticed again the subtle still sniffing his right leg, a limp hidden beneath control. "You shouldn't be wandering at night," he said. Elowen narrowed her eyes. "And you shouldn't be hiding like a thief." His gaze held hers. "Sometimes," he said softly, "hiding is the only way to survive men with power." Elowen's throat tightened. "You're not a servant," she said again, because it mattered. His eyes flicked away. "In a manner of speaking," he replied. Elowen looked at the disassembled watch on the table. "Your spring is misaligned," she said, because she couldn't stop herself from fixing broken things. His gaze snapped to hers. "You know watches?" "I know neglect," Elowen said. A beat. Then he pushed the watch toward her. "Then mend it," he said. Elowen sat, took it, and began to work. And in that quiet room full of broken time, something began between them that neither of them had permission to name. Over the next day, Elowen found herself pulled into small storms that revealed the soul of Ashbourne House. A maid was accused of stealing lace. Ashbourne's steward wanted her dismissed. Elowen asked for proof. There was none. Elowen insisted the maid stay and demanded the steward apologize, politely, publicly. The steward's face went rigid with fury. Lord Ashbourne watched from across the room and murmured almost to himself, "Good." Later, Elowen found a limping hound chained outside in cold rain because it was unsightly. She unhooked it and brought it into the kitchen herself. The servants stared as though she'd walked in naked. Rowan stood in the doorway, watching her with an expression that looked dangerously like admiration. "You like difficult creatures," he murmured. Elowen rubbed the hound's ears. "I like loyal ones," she replied.
That night in the clock room, Rowan spoke more than he should have. "Why are you marrying him?" he asked. Elowen's hands stilled over the watch gears. "Because my family is drowning," she said. Rowan's gaze tightened. "And what about you?" he asked softly. Elowen laughed once, without humor. "No one asks that," she said. His voice turned low and fierce. "I am asking," he replied. Elowen lifted her eyes, and for a moment she saw something raw in him, something that made her heart ache. Then footsteps sounded in the corridor, and he stepped back as if remembering he was not allowed to stand too close. "Go," he murmured, "before someone decides to punish you for breathing." Elowen left the clock room with her chest burning, because now she knew there was a man in this house who saw her, and that was both dangerous and addictive. The wedding happened 2 days after her arrival, as promised. Candlelit chapel, no guests, only the vicar and the cold stone walls. Elowen stood beside Lord Ashbourne, posture perfect, heart bruised. She spoke her vows, he spoke his. When it was done, he didn't kiss her. He offered his arm and let her out like an acquisition. That night she was alone. No husband came. Instead,
A maid arrived with papers. "Your lordship requires your signature," the maid said quickly, eyes down. Elowyn frowned. "What are they?" "Formalities, 2 copies, one for the parish, one for the solicitor," the maid repeated, too rehearsed. Elowyn's instincts flared. "Why now?" she asked. The maid's fingers tightened. "Please," she whispered, suddenly desperate, "just sign." Elowyn stared at her. Then she signed both, because the house had taught her what happens to people who refuse. The maid left, and somewhere in Ashbourne House a fire crackled softly. Paper curled into ash. The next morning, Lord Ashbourne summoned Elowyn to his study. He looked at her the way he always did, assessing, weighing, but something had shifted. Relief. "You have conducted yourself well," he said. Elowyn's mouth tightened. "I am not livestock." Ashbourne's gaze flicked. "Good," he murmured again. Then he said, without warning, "You have met the man in the clockroom." Elowyn's breath caught. "Yes," she admitted carefully. Lord Ashbourne leaned forward. "What do you think of him?" Elowyn's pulse hammered. "He is guarded," she said. "And?" he pressed. Elowyn's voice softened despite herself. "He is lonely." A long silence. Lord Ashbourne's eyes glimmered like a man who had been starving and finally smelled food. Then he rose, walked to the window, and spoke with quiet finality. "It is time to tell you the truth." Elowyn's blood went cold. The truth about what? Lord Ashbourne turned back, and in a voice so calm it felt like cruelty, he said, "About who you truly married." Elowyn's lungs forgot how to work. "What do you mean?" she whispered. Lord Ashbourne's face did not soften. "You are not my wife." Elowyn stumbled back a step. "That is impossible. I stood in the chapel." "You signed 2 documents," he said. "One of them was not what you believed." Elowyn's hands began to shake. "Then who—" The study door opened. Rowan stepped in. Not in rolled sleeves, not as a man hiding in a room of clocks. He was dressed now in dark tailored clothes, posture composed. The limp was still there, subtle, real. His eyes met Elowyn's, gray-blue, steady, and filled with something she'd never seen in them before, fear. Lord Ashbourne's voice cut clean through Elowyn's pounding heart. "This is my son." Elowyn went utterly still. Rowan bowed, low, respectful. "My name," he said quietly, "is Alistair Ashbourne." Elowyn's throat tightened with betrayal so sharp it almost made her laugh. "You," she whispered, "you lied." Alistair swallowed. "Yes," he said softly, "and I hated it." Elowyn's voice broke, furious. "And the marriage—" Lord Ashbourne answered. "You married him," he said, "legally, completely." Elowyn turned on Lord Ashbourne. "Why?" she demanded. For the first time, Lord Ashbourne's composure cracked, because fear lived under it. "Because my son cannot afford a wife who would treat him as a shameful secret. Because society would devour him, his limp, his pain, and the whisper that his mother was not my lawful wife." Elowyn's breath caught. Illegitimacy. The word hung unspoken like smoke. Alistair's jaw tightened. "I am not ashamed," he said quietly. Lord Ashbourne flinched as if struck. Alistair looked at Elowyn. "I needed to know you were real. Kind when it costs, strong when no one applauds." Elowyn's eyes burned. "So I was tested." Alistair's eyes held hers. "No," he said, "you were witnessed." That hurt worse, because he had shown her parts of herself she hadn't shown anyone. Alistair's voice dropped. "I will give you your choice back," he said. "I will sign an annulment and set you free. even if it ruins me, even if my father never forgives me. Lord Ashbourne snapped, "Alistair." Alistair didn't look away. "I will not begin my life by trapping a woman." Elowen stared at him. That was the first honest thing anyone had offered her in weeks. Her voice trembled, but it did not break. "I am furious," she said. Alistair nodded. "You should be." Elowen inhaled. "But I will not punish myself for your fear," she said quietly, looking at Lord Ashbourne. Alistair's eyes warmed. Elowen lifted her chin. "I choose the man I met in the clockroom, not the lie in the chapel." Alistair exhaled as though he had been holding his breath for years. He took her hand, careful, reverent, and kissed her knuckles once, like a vow he didn't yet deserve. Lord Ashbourne did something no one expected. He brought them to London. He stopped hiding Alistair. He dared society to stare. And society did. They stared at Alistair's limp. They whispered about his birth. They tried to pity Elowen. They tried to shame her. At their first public appearance, a woman hissed behind her fan, "Bought." Alistair's body went still, ready to turn like a blade. Elowen squeezed his hand once. Then she faced the crowd. "I was deceived," she said calmly. "Yes." The murmurs swelled. Elowen continued, voice clear. "And then I chose," she said, "which is more than many of you have ever done." London, cruel as it was, fell uncertainly silent, because London could survive a scandal, but it could not survive a woman who refused to be a victim. Later in their carriage, Alistair spoke softly. "You didn't have to defend me." Elowen looked at him, at the man the world tried to hide, and the man who still offered her freedom. "Yes," she said quietly, "I did." Because it was not love that saved her, not at first. It was choice, and the courage to be seen. Loveliest listener of the tone, kindness is not weakness, it is strength with manners, and a love worth keeping is never the love that cages you, but the love that stands beside you when the world decides to stare.
Loveliest listener of the ton. On the night London decided she was nothing, Miss Vivian Ashcroft wore the color of mourning and carried the name of a dead woman, not out of grief, out of strategy. The Vandermeer Masquerade was the Ton's great annual indulgence, an evening where London permitted itself the luxury of pretending that identity did not matter, that rank could be forgotten, that one might be anyone behind a painted mask. It was, of course, the opposite of true. At a masquerade, London watched harder, judged faster, and ruined more quietly. Vivian arrived precisely when the candles had burned low enough to make everything look flattering. She was 24, dark-haired, with a mouth that promised things she never intended to deliver, and eyes that measured rooms the way surveyors measured land, cataloging value, identifying threat. She wore a gown of deep charcoal silk that cost more than she could afford, a silver half-mask trimmed in black lace, and a composure so absolute it looked almost unkind. At her elbow, her cousin, Lord Basil Mortlake, smiled the smile of a man who believed he was holding a leash. "Remember," Basil murmured, adjusting his own gold-trimmed mask, "you are here as my companion, not as a guest in your own right. Smile, be pleasant, and for God's sake, do not speak to anyone of consequence." Vivian returned a perfectly composed nod. Of course, Basil. She did not say what she was truly thinking, that tonight she would speak to exactly one person of consequence, and that person would change everything. The ballroom of Vandermeer House was a cathedral built for vanity, gilded ceiling, mirrors so vast they doubled the crowd, and chandeliers that threw every face into amber drama, silk and secret, feather and flame. Half of London wore the faces of ancient gods or mythical beasts. The other half simply wore their wealth and called it a costume. Vivian moved through the room with practiced invisibility, present enough to observe, contained enough to be overlooked. She was looking for a letter. More precisely, she was looking for the man who had it. 3 weeks ago, in the library of Mortlake House, she had overheard the thing that changed her life. Basil, speaking to his solicitor, voice low and certain. The Ashcroft title is extinct. Everyone agrees. There is no heir, which means the lands revert to me. A pause. The solicitor's reply, careful. There is the matter of the girl, my lord. Basil, dismissive. She knows nothing. She has nothing, and she will go where I send her. But Vivian had known something. She had known about the letter her mother pressed into her hands the night she died, whispering, "Find the seal, find the man who holds the deed, tell him who you are." Her mother's name was Lady Catherine Ashcroft, which meant Vivian's name, her real name, her full name, the one Basil had spent years quietly erasing, was Vivian Ashcroft, Countess of Dunmore. A title London believed had died 30 years ago, a title Basil intended to claim by the month's end. She had one night to stop him, and the only man in England who could help her was somewhere in this room. Duke Alexander Vasily of Morvain, not an English duke, a Carpathian one, which meant the Ton did not quite know what to do with him, could not slot him into their familiar hierarchies, could not trace his bloodline through Debrett's, could not predict his loyalties or leverage his debts. He arrived in London 4 months ago on what he called a diplomatic mission and what London called an invasion of irresistible mystery. He was 32, broad-shouldered, with a face that was all clean angles and restrained force, dark hair worn slightly longer than English fashion approved of, eyes the color of winter storm clouds, and a stillness about him that made other men in the room appear to be fidgeting even when they stood perfectly still. The whispers were, as always, contradictory. He owns 3 castles. He lost them all in a war. He's a spy. He's a scholar. He never removes his mask at masquerades. He sees through everyone else's anyway. Vivian had spent a week identifying him through rumor and then through observation. She had spent another week determining that he was, against all odds, a man of genuine integrity, the sort who kept records, honored debts, and did not traffic in ruined women. She had spent the 3rd week composing what she was about to say to him. She found him near the east windows, half turned from the room, examining a painting of a storm at sea with the focused attention of a man who preferred the painting to the party. His mask was simple, black, unadorned, covering his upper face. He wore no costume, simply black and charcoal, impeccably tailored, a silver pin at his cravat. Vivian approached from the left. He heard her anyway. "The ships in that painting," she said quietly in French, the language she had chosen deliberately, as a signal, "are sinking." A beat. Duke Alexander turned slowly. His storm-colored eyes found her through the masks between them. "Yes," he replied also in French, his accent layered and warm. "But the painter made them beautiful on the way down." Vivian's pulse quickened once and then steadied. "That," she said, "is either very romantic or very practical." The Duke's mouth curved, not quite a smile, but the preparation for one. "In Morvain," he said,
They are the same thing. Vivian allowed 3 seconds of silence, then said plainly, "I need your help, Your Grace. I have approximately 40 minutes before my cousin realizes I am not where he left me, and approximately 4 weeks before he steals a title that belongs to me." The Duke's expression shifted from guarded warmth to focused attention. "You're direct," he observed. "I don't have time to be charming." The Duke looked at her for a long moment. Then, "Tell me." She told him quickly and without embellishment. The Ashcroft earldom, the extinct title, her mother's letter which she had memorized to the syllable, Basil's plan,
The deed, the legal instrument that would confirm her identity and her claim, which Basil's solicitor had quietly removed from the family archive and which, according to the one loyal maid still in the house, had been sold to a collector of legal curiosities. That collector was the Duke of Morvain. He had bought it 3 months ago, not knowing what it was. Vivienne watched his face as the realization landed. To his credit, he did not look away. "I have it," he said. "It's at my residence in Belgrave Square." Vivienne's breath trembled, only once. "Will you return it?" she asked. "I will do better," the Duke said. "I will witness it." "You understand," Vivienne said carefully, "that if you do this, if you stand beside me tonight, Basil will make you his enemy." Alexander's expression did not shift. "Your cousin," he said, "has already attempted to delay my diplomatic correspondence for 2 months, bribed one of my attachés, and told 3 separate hostesses that I am financially ruined." A pause. "I am not particularly frightened of him." Vivienne blinked. "You knew?" "I suspected." The Duke's eyes warmed slightly. "I did not know why. Now I do." He offered his arm. "Shall we give London a better story than the one your cousin has been writing?" Vivienne looked at his arm. At this man she had met 12 minutes ago, at the offer that could save her or ruin her, or both. Then she placed her hand on his sleeve. "Try to keep pace," she murmured. The Duke's mouth curved fully, finally, into something that was absolutely a smile. "I'll do my best," he said. They returned to the ballroom together. That was the first scandal, a foreign duke escorting a woman no one could quite place through a crowd that had spent 20 years being told she was unimportant. Whispers rose like smoke. "Who is she?" "She came with Mortlake." "She's left Mortlake." "He's going to be furious." They moved directly to the center of the room, where Basil stood. Basil, in his golden mask, turned as they approached, and his face did that specific thing that faces do when a plan meets an obstacle it hadn't imagined. It went very still, and then very careful. "Vivienne," his voice was silk over stone, "I see you've wandered." Vivienne's voice was entirely calm. "I've arrived, actually." Basil's gaze moved to Alexander. "Your Grace," he said, with the warmth of a man who needed something. "Mortlake." Alexander's voice was neither cold nor warm. It was simply precise. "This is the deed of title to the Ashcroft earldom, Countess of Dunmore. I purchased it recently from a private collection." I paused. I was unaware at the time of its significance. A ripple moved through the nearest cluster of guests. Basil's smile did not move. "A fascinating curiosity," he said smoothly. "As I'm sure you know, the Ashcroft line is extant," Alexander said. Silence. "The title," Alexander continued, "passes through the maternal line, as specified in the original letters patent, which means it did not die with the last earl. It passed to his daughter, a beat, and then to her daughter." The room made the sound that ballrooms make when they realize they are about to witness something historic, a collective inhale, barely audible, absolutely felt. Basil's voice dropped dangerously.
This is absurd. Alexander's eyes moved to him, unimpressed. The documents are notarized, witnessed, and in order. You are welcome to examine them. Basil turned on Vivienne. You, he said, voice cracking at its edges. You arranged this. You've been scheming behind my... Basil. Vivienne's voice quiet, clear, like a door being opened that had been locked for years. You told me I had nothing, she said. You told me I was no one. You told me to smile and be pleasant and not to speak to anyone of consequence. A pause. The room held its breath. Vivienne looked at her cousin with eyes that had finished grieving. You were wrong on all 3 counts. What happened next would be discussed in drawing rooms for years. Basil, Lord Mortlake, who had hosted these people at his table, who had borrowed their money and accepted their deference and traded on their trust, turned the color of old ivory. He looked around the room for allies. He found none, because London, whatever its cruelties, loved a revelation above all else, and this one had teeth. A baroness near the fireplace said loud enough to carry, "Good God, Mortlake has been managing her estate." A lord beside her added, dry as dust, "or mismanaging." A woman in a peacock mask turned to her companion and whispered what London would whisper for weeks. She was the Countess the whole time. Basil made one final attempt. He stepped toward Vivienne, voice dropping low, visible threat wrapped in composure. "You have no proof beyond a piece of paper," he hissed. "A deed without corroboration is nothing. You have no witnesses. You have no—" "She has me." Alexander's voice, quiet, immovable. Basil turned. Alexander stood with the stillness of a man who had already decided the outcome and found it unremarkable. "I am a duke of a sovereign nation, with full standing before English law as a diplomatic witness. I will testify to the document's authenticity. I will testify to what I have heard in this room tonight." His eyes held Basil's. "And I will ensure that every solicitor, magistrate, and peer in London has a copy of this deed before Monday morning." A silence so thorough it felt like the end of something. Then Basil did something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He left the room. Not grandly, not triumphantly. He simply walked to the door, and the crowd parted, not because of respect, but because they could not be associated with what he had become. In the middle of the Vandermeer ballroom, Vivienne Ashcroft, Countess of Dunmore, stood in her charcoal gown and silver mask and breathed, just breathed. Because the thing she had feared for years had happened. London had looked at her, truly looked at her, and she had not collapsed. She had expanded. Alexander found her 20 minutes later in a corridor near the musicians' gallery, where the candlelight was softer and the crowd's hunger did not quite reach. She had removed her mask. He had removed his. They looked at each other finally, with nothing between them. "You didn't tell me that you already knew about Mortlake." Alexander was quiet for a moment. "No," he admitted. Vivienne's gaze was steady. "Why?" Alexander's jaw tightened, not with guilt, but with the precision of a man being careful. "Because," he said, "I had suspected something was wrong for weeks. The document, Mortlake's interference, the pattern." A pause. "I wanted to know if you would come to me yourself, or if you would wait to be rescued." Vivienne looked at him for a long beat. "And if I had waited?" she asked. Alexander's eyes softened, barely. "Then I would have brought it to you," he said quietly. "I wasn't going to let him win, but I wanted—" He paused, as though choosing honesty over performance. "I wanted to see who you were before I decided how to help." Vivienne's chest tightened. "That is very presumptuous," she said. Yes, he agreed. You had no right to test me. No, he said, I didn't. He held her gaze without flinching. I came to the party anyway, Vivian said finally. You did, he said. I came with a plan, a good one. I didn't need saving. Alexander's mouth curved. No, he said, you needed a witness. There's a difference. Vivian looked at this man, this stranger who had held her deed to her identity for 3 months without knowing it, who had watched Basil with quiet suspicion, who had come to a masquerade and removed his mask before she removed hers. She thought about what it meant to trust someone who had kept things from her. She thought about what it meant that she understood exactly why he had. Witness, she said slowly, as if testing the word. Not rescuer, he confirmed. Not owner. Never that. Vivian's breath trembled, the first real trembling of the evening. I have to rebuild everything, she said. The estate, my reputation, my name. It will take years. It will be brutal. Alexander nodded. I know. And you intend to... She stopped. I intend nothing, he said carefully. I am telling you that I am still here after knowing all of it, and that I find you remarkable, and that I have no claim on what you do next. His eyes held hers. What you do next is yours. Vivian was quiet for a moment. Then she said the truest thing in her. I have spent 24 years being managed, she said softly. First by my mother's grief, then by Basil's plans, then by the Ton's expectations. She lifted her eyes to his. I don't yet know what I am when no one is managing me. Alexander's expression was open, genuinely, unguardedly open. Then find out, he said, and if you want company while you do. He stopped himself, waited. Vivian finished the sentence for him. I'll choose it myself. Alexander smiled, and she chose it. The months that followed were exactly as brutal as she had promised. The legal confirmation of the Ashcroft title took 6 weeks, 3 solicitors, 2 hearings, and 1 very irritated magistrate who clearly wished Ancient Letters patent would stop complicating his schedule.
Basil contested it, of course. He lost. Not dramatically, not in a single devastating moment. He simply lost, step by step, clause by clause, precedent by precedent, until there was nothing left to contest, and the name Mortlake became London's shorthand for overconfidence meeting consequence. Vivian moved into Ashcroft House in October. It smelled of old paper and neglect and something faintly like her mother's rose water, imagined or not. She stood in the entrance hall for a long time, alone. She did not cry. She simply catalogued everything that needed to be done. It was a very long list. She found it deeply satisfying. Alexander did not impose himself. He called twice in the first month, formally, correctly, with a card left at the door, accepted twice because she chose to accept it. He brought no advice she had not asked for. He offered no opinions on her decisions. When she made a choice he might have made differently, he said nothing unless she asked, and when she asked, he said it once and then let it rest. She tested this. Repeatedly, he passed every time. In December, at a ball she attended for the first time as Countess of Dunmore, standing in a room that had once looked through her, a matron cut her eyes at Vivian's gown and murmured, loud enough to carry, "Self-made Countess, how modern!" Vivian turned to face the woman with an expression of such perfect, unhurried calm that the matron actually stepped back. "I was born to it," Vivian said pleasantly. "Someone simply forgot to tell me." Laughter moved through the nearest group, genuine, startled, edged with relief that the joke had landed on someone else. Across the room, Alexander watched her with something in his eyes that he had never offered anyone.
not admiration exactly, not desire exactly, something rarer, recognition. The look of a person seeing someone for who they actually are and finding it, to their own unguarded surprise, the most interesting thing in the room. When he crossed the floor to her, he did not claim her arm. He simply arrived beside her. "You're enjoying yourself," he observed. "Deeply," Vivienne agreed. "London is still deciding what to do with you. London can take its time. I have an estate to restore and a title to establish, and no intention of waiting on London's permission to do either." Alexander looked at her, quiet with something warm. "May I have this dance, or is it inconvenient?" Vivienne considered him, this man who had held her deed and not known it, who had tested her and admitted it, who had witnessed her without managing her, who had stood in a ballroom full of people and offered her something she had never had from any of them. The simple, radical dignity of being believed. "It is perfectly convenient," she said, and she took his hand. Not because she owed him anything, not because she needed anything, but because she wanted to. Because wanting things, choosing things for herself on her own terms, without guilt or gratitude or performance, that, she had decided, was the whole point of having a name. My loveliest listener of the ton. If there is something to carry from Vivienne's story, it is this. A title is not a self, a rescue is not a relationship, and the most radical thing you can do in a room full of people who have decided what you are is simply refuse to agree. Vivienne did not win because she was saved. She won because she arrived. Until next time, keep your mask for the rooms that don't deserve your face, and your name for the ones that do.
Loveliest listener of the ton. On the morning London decided to forget she existed, Maren Ellis stood outside the locked door of the east wing of Ashmore House and prepared to do something she could not take back. She had already decided. Not to keep her head down, not to be grateful and invisible and safe, to find out what they were hiding. Ashmore House stood in the heart of Mayfair like a cathedral built to wealth rather than God. 7 stories of pale stone, 43 rooms, a marble staircase imported from Florence that no servant was permitted to touch with a bare hand. Gas lamps burning in every corridor, even in daylight, because darkness itself was not welcome here without an invitation. Maren had worked there 11 months. She knew the house the way a prisoner knows a cell, intimately, grudgingly, with a kind of dark tenderness born of having no other choice. She knew that the east corridor smelled of damp after rain, that the 3rd stair from the top of the back staircase creaked like a confession, that the library lock stuck if you turned it too fast, and that Mrs. Finch, who managed Ashmore House the way a jailer manages a prison, had eyes that missed nothing and a memory that forgave even less. Maren was 23, dark-haired, slight, with the kind of stillness that came not from peace but from practice, years of learning to take up less space, make less noise, want less openly. Her hands were rough from cold water and stone floors. Her mind was not. She had a face that looked at a glance like pleasant blankness, the kind of face you looked at and immediately forgot because you were not in the habit of looking at maids. But her eyes, pale gray, watchful, faintly, privately amused, those were the eyes of a woman who had already decided something about you before you had opened your mouth. The key to the east wing had been pressed into her palm that morning by Mrs. Finch, who did not look at her when she did it. Thorough, Mrs. Finch said. Quick and quiet. Yes, Mrs. Finch, Maren replied.
What she was really thinking was, 6 weeks. 6 weeks this corridor has been locked. Thomas Reeve worked it the night before he vanished, and now suddenly they needed cleaned in a hurry, without explanation, without fuss. Someone is coming, and someone is very afraid of what the rooms remember. She turned the key, she pushed open the door, the cold hit her first, and then she began. The east wing had been stripped, not emptied, that would have been obvious, that would have required explanation, stripped carefully, methodically, of anything that might answer a question. The furniture remained, the curtains hung undisturbed, but the shelves were bare, the fireplace ash was too fresh for a room supposedly untouched, and in 3 places along the far wall the plaster was new. Paler than the stone around it, not yet fully dry. Marin pressed 2 fingers against the nearest patch and felt it give, just slightly, beneath her touch. She thought about Thomas Reeve. He had been a footman here, 20 years old, quiet, kind, with ink-stained fingers from the letters he wrote his mother every Sunday without fail. 6 weeks ago he had been here. Then he was gone, room emptied before the other servants woke, no reference given, no farewell said, as though he had never existed at all. Marin had liked him, and she had found the letter. Not by searching, she would have you know that. She had been laying a fire in the Duke's study 3 weeks ago in the gray 6 o'clock morning when she noticed the envelope beneath the edge of the desk blotter, pushed there hastily, the corner just visible. The name had stopped her cold. Thomas Reeve. She should not have touched it. She knew, even as her fingers closed around the paper, that knowing things was a dangerous business when you were a housemaid in someone else's world, that information was not power for women like her. It was simply weight. She read it anyway. Because Marin Ellis had never once in her life been able to leave a truth alone, and she was not about to begin now. The letter was short, 3 paragraphs, but each one landed like a stone dropped into still water, the ripple spreading farther than you expected, touching things you had not known were close. Thomas Reeve had not been dismissed. He had been bought. Handsomely, permanently bought, in exchange for his silence about what he had witnessed in the east wing of Ashmore House on the 14th of October. The letter did not say what he had witnessed, but the final line said this: "If you speak, the arrangements we have made for your mother's care will be reconsidered. If you stay silent, they will continue. The choice, as always, is yours." Marin stood in that study for a very long time. Then she folded the letter with hands she forced to remain steady, replaced it precisely where she had found it, finished the fire, picked up her bucket and brushes, walked out, and told herself all the way down the back stairs several calm and reasonable lies. It is not your concern. You do not know what happened here. You cannot afford to know. All true. All insufficient. Because Thomas Reeve was out there somewhere, staying silent to protect his mother, and whatever he had seen was still locked behind these walls, and Marin, to her considerable inconvenience, had a conscience. She was on her knees at the skirting board, brush moving along the baseboard, when the brush caught the edge of something. She stopped, pressed. A hollow sound, not the dull thud of sore, but the resonant echo of empty space beneath. A loose floorboard. She looked at it for a long moment, then she lifted it. Inside, a tin box, small, unassuming, the kind of thing that held nothing of consequence, except that inside the tin box were letters. Marin sat on the cold floor of the east wing and read every single one. The previous Duke of Ashmore, Edmund's father, dead 3 years, and London called it a tragedy, had secretly owned a factory in the Midlands, not openly, never openly, through a chain of holding companies designed to be untraceable, built specifically to put distance between the Ashworth name and the smoke and the stone. 7 years. 7 years of falsified safety records, bribed inspectors, and workers who raised complaints quietly disappearing from the payroll. Then, 4 years ago, a floor collapsed. 3 men died. An inquiry was opened and then quietly, expensively, shamefully shelved. 3 families were paid to vanish. Records were destroyed. The letters named every man who had helped, every sum exchanged, every favor purchased. The previous duke had been thorough. Not thorough enough. Someone had saved these letters, hidden them here, beneath the floor of this stripped and silent room, waiting for the day they would matter. And now, Marin Ellis, housemaid, was sitting on top of them. She heard his footsteps in the corridor. She recognized them. She despised that she recognized them, that her stupid, traitorous heart had catalogued the particular cadence of this man's walk in the weeks since he had started appearing in the East Wing, that her pulse had learned to quicken 2 seconds before the door opened. There was nowhere to put the letters, no time. Edmund Ashworth opened the door. He looked at her on the floor, at the tin box, at the letter spread across her lap. The silence lasted a very long time. When he spoke, his voice was careful, emptied from everything. "Where did you find those?" Not a question, an observation. "Under the floorboard, Your Grace." She kept her voice even, she kept her face still, but she looked at him, directly, steadily, the way she looked at no one else in this house, because she needed to see his face, needed to know what she was dealing with. What she saw was not guilt. What she saw was grief, old, private, held alone for a very long time. He crossed the room, and then, and this is the thing she would return to later, in the small hours of cold mornings, he sat on the floor. Not in a chair, there were none. He sat on the floor across from her, back against the bare wall, elbows on his knees, head bowed, the Duke of Ashmore, in the dust, looking like a man who had finally run out of places to stand. "You've read them," he said. "Yes. All of them. Enough." He lifted his head. His face was bleak in the winter light from the window, stripped of the composure she had come to expect, stripped of everything that rank and habit had laid over the top of him. "How much do you understand?" he asked. Marin looked at the letters in her lap. 3 men died, she said quietly, in a factory your family owned secretly through companies built to protect the name. The inquiry was buried. The families were silenced. Thomas Reeves saw something he was not supposed to see and was paid to forget it. She met his eyes. "And you have known. For how long?" Edmund's jaw tightened. "Since I returned from the continent 8 months ago. My solicitor had already... My father had left standing instructions. The arrangements were made before I knew they existed." "And you allowed them to stand," Marin said. A long silence. "Yes," he said, "I did." The word fell between them like a verdict. "Why?" she asked. Edmund looked at the letters. "Because I did not know how to undo it without destroying everything else. The factory still operates. 400 workers depend on it, the families of this estate, tenants, staff. If the Ashworth name collapses, they collapse with it." He stopped. His throat worked. "I told myself I would find another way, reparations made quietly, truth told in pieces. I told myself the silence was temporary." "You told yourself," Marin said, "that if you were still enough, the past would stay buried." He looked at her. "Yes," he said, quietly, ashamed. Marin looked down at the letters. 3 men. She thought about them the way she thought about Thomas Reeve, not as incidents, not as liabilities, not the incident, but as people, with mothers, with Sunday habits, with names that deserved to be spoken in rooms that would not say them. "What are you going to do?" Edmund asked. His voice was level, but beneath it was something rawer than a threat, something that was the opposite of a threat, something exposed. With what you know, he said, you could take those letters, go to a journalist, end the Ashworth name entirely, and me. Marin regarded him for a long moment. Is that what you're afraid of? She asked. I'm afraid of many things, he said. At the moment, I'm afraid of you. She should not have felt what she felt at that. She felt it anyway. I'm a housemaid, she said. You're the most dangerous person in this room, he replied, without irony, without qualification. Marin looked at the letters in her hands and thought about what silence cost and what it cost the people who were not powerful enough to choose it for themselves. Tell the truth, she said. Edmund's eyes sharpened. It will destroy your father's name, she said. Not yours, not yet, not if you tell it yourself, before someone takes it from you and uses it as a weapon. He was very still. The 3 families deserve to know, she continued. Thomas Reeve deserves his silence released. And you, she met his eyes and she did not look away. You deserve to stop carrying a secret that was never yours to carry in the first place. Edmund stared at her. A housemaid on a cold floor telling him how to be a better man. And the terrible thing, the wonderful, wretched thing, was that she was right, and he knew it, and she knew that he knew it, and they were both sitting in the knowledge of it on a dusty floor in an empty room with 3 men's letters between them. You make it sound simple, he said. I know it isn't, Marin replied. I know what it costs to speak truth in rooms that would prefer silence. I've done it. It cost me a position once, left me with nothing but the clothes I was wearing and the city of London, which is not, I assure you, as hospitable as it appears. She paused. It will cost you considerably more than that. And you think I should do it anyway? I think, she said, that you already know you should. I think that's why you're still sitting on the floor with me instead of calling for Mrs. Finch and having me dismissed. Edmund looked at her for a long moment. Then, quietly, he laughed. Not with joy, not the laugh of a man who found things funny, the laugh of a man who had been seen, entirely, honestly, without flattery or performance, for perhaps the first time in years. Ellis, he said. Yes, Your Grace. What on earth am I going to do with you? Marin began folding the letters back into the tin box with careful, deliberate hands. Nothing, Your Grace. I'm going to do something with myself, as I generally do. He came back to the East Wing the next day, and the day after that. She told herself the first time was coincidence, the second time oversight. By the third morning, standing in the corridor with her brush in hand and his footsteps coming down the passage toward her at the hour they always came now, she had run out of comfortable stories and was simply left with the truth. The Duke of Ashmore was finding reasons to be where she was, and Marin, who was not naive and had not been naive since approximately the age of 9, understood what that meant, understood it, catalogued it, and then put it away in a locked room inside herself and told it firmly not to make any noise. He was a duke. She was a housemaid. The distance between those 2 facts was not a gap, it was a chasm. It was the whole architecture of the world they lived in, every social rule and written law and unwritten expectation, a structure built specifically, deliberately, to keep people like her in their proper place. She told herself this every morning at 4:30. She told herself this every time she heard his footsteps in the East Wing corridor and felt something in her chest do something inconvenient. It became something of a mantra. It did not help, because he talked to her, not about the household, not about the letters, not about the factory that made them sit together on a cold floor and speak the truth in the dark. He talked to her the way people did not talk to maids, as though she had a mind that was worth addressing, as though her opinions were things he was genuinely curious about rather than tolerating. He asked what she was reading. She told him. He asked what she thought. She told him that too, and she did not soften it, and he did not seem to want her to. He disagreed with her sometimes, good-naturedly, precisely, as though the disagreement itself was something he enjoyed. She disagreed back. He listened. Once, just once, on a question about factory reform, of all the uncomfortable ironies, she watched him change his mind in real time, his expression shifting from resistance to consideration to a kind of reluctant concession that he wore the way a man wears something new that fits better than expected. "You're insufferable," he told her once. "I know," she said. "Mrs. Finch has said the same, though with somewhat less affection." He looked away quickly, but not before she saw it, the almost smile. She looked away too. London watched, of course. London always watched. The other servants noticed. How could they not? A duke who walked the East Wing corridors before breakfast. A housemaid who looked at him when she spoke instead of her own feet. Mrs. Finch noticed most of all, and her noticing had the texture of a threat that had not yet found its form. Marin felt the watching. She was used to being watched. She simply made herself unreadable, the way she had always. Still face, still hands, pulse screaming quietly beneath her skin where no one could see it. The almost moment came on a Tuesday evening in November. The house was occupied with a dinner party, 30 guests, 3 courses, the full terrible machinery of a society evening grinding through its motions below stairs. Marin was not required to serve. She had spent the evening in her attic room reading by candlelight, which was her greatest luxury and her only privacy, until she realized that the book she was reading was not hers. One of his. She had borrowed it 10 days ago without asking, because by then the rules between them had quietly rearranged themselves into something that made asking feel unnecessary and also, she suspected, slightly absurd. She should return it. The study was empty at this hour. He was supposed to be at dinner. He was not at dinner. He was standing at the window in his shirt sleeves, coat discarded over the back of the chair, looking out at the winter dark of Mayfair with an expression of a man who had removed himself from the company of 30 people and was not even slightly sorry about it. He turned when she entered. Marin held up the book. "I'm returning this," she said. "I didn't expect you to be here. I'll go." "Did you enjoy it?" he asked. She stopped. The first half was brilliant. The second half made me want to argue with the author directly, which is unfortunately not possible, given that he died in 1841. Something moved in his expression. "What would you argue?" She told him. He disagreed, firmly, clearly, with the particular energy he brought to disagreements with her that he never seemed to bring to anything else. "You are insufferable," he told her once. "I know," she said. The cutting quiet inside her was poised to illuminate their sense. The book she had come to return was lying forgotten on the desk between them, and at some point, she could not have said exactly when, the argument had become something else. They were standing very close, close enough that she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, close enough to hear the slight unevenness in his breathing that had not been there at the start of the evening. She stopped speaking mid-sentence. He did not look away. The lamplight sat between them, warm and still, and the dark pressed against the windows, and 30 people were somewhere below them laughing too loudly at things that were not that funny, and none of it was real in the way this moment was real. "Marin," he said. Not Ellis, not Miss Ellis.
Just her name, quiet, unguarded, stripped of every layer of form and propriety until it was simply her. She stepped back. "Your Grace," she said. Her voice was steady. She was distantly grateful for this. "I should go." He did not reach for her. He did not move at all. "Yes," he said. "You probably should." She set the book on the desk, and she left. She walked down the corridor and through the door and onto the back staircase, and she stood on the 3rd step, the one that creaked like a confession, and pressed her back against the cold stone wall and stayed there, very still, for a very long time. "This is the shape of impossible things," she told herself. "You have always known this shape. You have known it since the beginning.
Leave it alone." She went to bed. She lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling and listened to the distant noise of the dinner party below, and she did not sleep until well past midnight. And even then, she dreamed of lamplight. It was Mrs. Finch who ended it. Of course it was Mrs. Finch. Marin had been expecting it, had felt the ending gathering the way you feel a storm before it arrives, that particular thickening of the air. She had not known what form it would take. She had simply known it was coming. It came on a Wednesday morning in December, 6 days after the study, when Mrs. Finch called her into the small, cold office behind the kitchen and informed her, with the particular pleasure of a woman who has been waiting some time to deliver a verdict, that her services at Ashmore House were no longer required. "You have been," Mrs. Finch said, folding her hands on the desk, "inappropriate in your conduct, in your manner, in your attitude." Marin stood with her hands folded in front of her and her face arranged into the pleasant blankness she had perfected over 23 years. "In what specific way, Mrs. Finch?" she asked. "You know in what way. I would like it stated clearly." Mrs. Finch's eyes went cold as marble. "You have forgotten your place. You have made yourself conspicuous. You will collect your things and be gone by noon. There will be no reference." No reference? Without a reference, she was nothing. Without a reference, the next position would be harder, and the one after that harder still, and the city would grind her down to whatever was left when the options ran out. Marin looked at the woman across the desk. She thought about 11 months of 4:30 mornings, cold water, stone floors, making herself small and quiet and unnoticed in every room of this house. She thought about Thomas Reeve, writing letters to his mother with ink-stained fingers. She thought about 3 men who had been called the incident. "Who asked you to dismiss me, Mrs. Finch?" she said quietly. "I beg your pardon? It was not the Duke, was it?" Not a question, an observation, because the Duke would have told me himself. A flicker, barely perceptible, but Marin had been reading faces for years in rooms full of people who thought themselves unreadable. "You will leave," Mrs. Finch said very quietly, "by noon." Marin left. She packed her things in the attic room with the efficiency of someone who had packed before, who had always known, in the place where she kept her honest accounting of things, that rooms like this were temporary, that belonging was something you carried inside yourself because no one would ever let you set it down anywhere permanent. One carpet bag, the books she had bought herself, the pearl earrings that had been her mother's. Everything else had always been Ashmore's. She was halfway down the back staircase when his voice came from the landing above. "Ellis." She stopped. He was at the top of the stair, in his morning coat. He had come from the upper floors at a pace that was not quite dignified. His expression was not quite composed, and Marin felt something painful happen very quickly in the center of her chest. "Who told you to leave?" he asked. "Mrs. Finch." "I did not authorize. I know." He came down 2 steps. They were nearly level. She thought, with one part of her mind, that this was probably deliberate. "I'll have it reversed, immediately." "No," she said. He blinked. "I beg your—" "Don't." The word came out very steady. She was grateful for that. "If you call me back now under these circumstances, you will make my position in this house impossible. Every servant will know. It will not help me. It will only satisfy you." Edmund's jaw worked. "Then what?" "Tell the truth. What we talked about. Tell it properly, publicly, before someone takes it from you and weaponizes it. Thomas Reeve's silence, the 3 families, all of it." He stared at her from 2 steps above. And she looked up at him, this man who had sat on a dusty floor and laughed a real laugh and said her name as though it mattered, and she felt the ache of it move through her like a cold draft through a stone building, finding all the gaps she had not sealed properly. "Marin," he said quietly, "where will you go?" She lifted the carpet bag. "I'll manage," she said. "I generally do." She walked out of Ashmore House into the gray December morning. She did not look back. She had learned very young that looking back was how you got turned to salt. She found a room in Bloomsbury on a street that smelled of coal smoke and bread from the bakery on the corner. She found work within a fortnight, not easily without a reference, but Marin had learned to present herself with a directness that served in lieu of one. A small progressive women's publication on Holborn, understaffed and underfunded, and staffed almost entirely with women who had opinions and nowhere to put them. They paid very little. They asked her opinion constantly. She found this, on balance, an acceptable trade. She did not hear from Edmund Ashworth. She had not expected to. She told herself this firmly, clearly, in the same tone she used for the other important lies, the ones that were true enough to live with. She thought about him at inconvenient hours, early mornings when the light was gray and the city was still quiet, and there was nothing to occupy her mind before it had properly woken. The lamplight, the floor of the east wing, the almost smile, his voice saying her name just once without the weight of who they were. She allowed the thoughts, then she did the next thing, because there was no useful alternative. London talked about the Ashworths, as London always talked about everything, in drawing rooms and clubs and the columns of newspapers, in the particular breathless way of a city that fed on other people's difficulties. A factory scandal somewhere in the Midlands, an inquiry into the late Duke's business practices, rumors of documents, of families compensated, of records that were not as thoroughly destroyed as someone had hoped. 6 weeks after she left Ashmore House, the story broke. Not in rumors, not in fragments and whispers and the careful language of implication. In full. A voluntary statement given by Edmund Ashworth, Duke of Ashmore, released simultaneously to 3 newspapers. A complete accounting of the factory, the collapse, the deaths, the cover-up, the payments, the names of the men who had made it disappear, reparations to the 3 families, proper reparations, framed not as charity but as an acknowledgment of a debt that could never be fully paid. And Thomas Reeve publicly released from any agreement made on his behalf with back wages and a written apology. The Ton was thunderstruck. London divided, as London always divided, between those who called him noble and those who called him a fool, with the largest contingent being those who could not decide and so settled on calling them both, depending on the company. Marin read the statement at her desk in the offices of the publication, standing at the window because she had arisen automatically from her chair when she saw the headline, the December sun cold on her face and her hands not quite steady on the page. She thought, good. She thought, you did it. She thought very quietly, so quietly it was almost not a thought at all. I miss you. She folded the paper, she sat back down, she returned to the article she was editing. She did not permit herself anything else. He found her on a Thursday afternoon in February. She was coming out of the publication offices, coat buttoned against the cold, a stack of letters under her arm, mentally composing the response to the education piece she needed to have drafted before 5 o'clock. Edmund Ashworth was standing on the pavement outside. He looked like a man who had walked through fire. Not unscathed, not unmarked, but standing, upright, clear-eyed, present on the other side of it. His face was thinner, there were shadows under his eyes that had not been there in November, but his gaze was the same, dark, direct, doing the thing it always did, looking at her as though she were a person. "How did you find me?" she asked. He said, "Thomas Reeve. He sends your regards. He has taken a position in a legal firm in Gray's Inn. He seems, against considerable odds, to be thriving." Marin's chest tightened in a way she was going to have to examine later when she was alone. "Good," she said. "I owe you an apology," Edmund said. She tilted her head. "For what specifically?" "For Mrs. Finch acting without my knowledge, for not," his jaw tightened, "for being slower than I should have been, in several respects, some of them significant." "You were occupied," Marin said, "with publicly dismantling your family's legacy of concealment. I understand this takes some time."
His mouth did the almost smile, the one she had catalogued without meaning to, the one that lived in the territory adjacent to joy. "You are not going to make this easy," he said. "I am not in the business of making things easy," she replied. "I would have thought you'd established that by now." He took a step toward her. The February street moved around them, people and carriages, and the gray particular noise of London in winter, and none of it stopped, none of it noticed, the world indifferent as it always was to the moments that mattered. "Marin," he said, her name again, just that. "I want to say something to you, and I would like you, just this once, not to immediately find a reason to argue with it." She waited. "You are the most honest person I have ever encountered," he said. "You are the most infuriating, the most precise, and the most—" Something crossed his face. Something she recognized now, had been recognizing since November, had simply not allowed herself to call it by its name. "The only person whose opinion I have ever wanted without reservation, without the instinct to manage it or discount it or protect myself from it." The street was cold. She could feel it through her coat. "I sat on a cold floor and told you the truth about my family when I had told no one else. Not because you asked, because you were there, and it seemed, for the first time in years, like the truth might actually matter to someone, like I might matter to someone. Not the title, not the name, me." Marin's throat was doing something that required a significant effort to manage. "I know what this looks like," she said, carefully. "I know what the world will say." "The world," Edmund said, "has said a great deal about me in recent months. I have found I can survive it." "It's different when it's—" "I know what it is," he said. "I know what you are and what I am and what the distance between those things looks like to everyone who is watching. I know what my mother will say. I know what the clubs will say. I know what the newspapers will write." He paused. "I also know that I went to the East Wing every morning for 3 weeks because you were there. I know that you walked out of my house with a carpet bag, without a reference, with more dignity than anyone I have ever met in a ballroom or a drawing room or anywhere else that dignity is supposed to live. And I know," his voice dropped just slightly, "that I have spent 2 months being unable to think of much else." The silence that followed was the loudest thing on the street. "What are you asking?" Marin said. "I'm not asking anything. I'm telling you that I'm entirely and irrevocably in earnest, and that I would very much like to know whether you will allow me to call on you, properly, as a person who wishes to be considered worthy of your company, which I am aware is a considerable undertaking." Marin looked at him. She looked at him for a long moment on a February pavement in London, and she thought about all the reasons it was impossible. They were real reasons. The world was real. Its cruelties were real. The machinery of class and expectation and social rule was real and grinding, and had swallowed kinder people than either of them without pausing for breath. She also thought about a man sitting in the dust with his back against a bare wall, telling her the truth when he had nothing to gain from telling it and everything to lose. She thought, he did it, not for me, for the right reasons, for 3 men who were called the incident and 400 workers and a boy with ink-stained fingers. But he did it. She shifted the letters under her arm. "You may call on me," she said, "Tuesday evenings between 5 and 7. I work until 5 and I will not be hurrying." She fixed him with a look that she had learned from no one, that was entirely her own. "I reserve the right to argue you out of it at any point and without warning." Edmund Ashworth's face changed. Not dramatically, not in the way faces changed in novels, all at once and completely.
It changed the way a room changes when someone opens a window that has been shut too long. Not all at once, but enough. Something opening, something that had been held very carefully in the dark, finally permitted a small, uncertain portion of the light. "Tuesday," he said. "Tuesday," she confirmed. "Don't be late. I have an article to finish." She walked away. 3 steps, 4, the street noise closing around her. She was composing the response to the Education Act piece in her head already, filing Edmund Ashworth in the place she kept things that were not yet resolved, that required more time and more thought and more... "She's remarkable," he heard him say quietly to the February air behind her. She kept walking, but she allowed herself, for exactly 2 steps and not one more, to smile.
London talked, of course. London always talked. The Duke of Ashmore, already notorious for his extraordinary public confession, became doubly scandalous the following spring when it emerged, through the particular channels by which these things always emerged, that he was calling on a woman who had until recently been employed as his housemaid. The clubs were apoplectic. His mother wept into her correspondence with such frequency that her stationery supplier reported a significant increase in orders. A columnist in one of the less generous papers ran a piece titled "The Duke and the Dustpan," which Marin read aloud to Edmund over tea in the Bloomsbury sitting-room that was hers now, that she had chosen, furnished, and made her own on a salary that was not large but was earned, with the dry, precise delivery of a woman who found human absurdity genuinely and deeply funny. "You're not offended?" Edmund asked, watching her. "Endlessly," she said, "but I've found that being offended and being deterred are entirely different things, and I see no reason to confuse them." He looked at her across the tea-table with the expression she had stopped trying to catalogue and simply allowed herself to know. He had learned by then that the things she needed him to say, he could simply show her, by being present, by being consistent, by choosing her company in rooms where choosing her company cost him something real. And the things she did not need him to say were best left in the silence, where they kept better anyway. In May, his mother organized a reception, a last, stately, elaborately catered attempt to place Edmund in a room with suitable alternatives and trust that proximity would do what letters had failed to accomplish. Edmund attended. He crossed the full length of the room, past the whispering matrons, the watchful fathers, the lovely daughters who had been presented for his consideration in their best silk and their most practiced smiles, and sat down beside Marin Ellis in the corner chair, where she had been in focused and apparently entirely absorbing conversation with a parliamentarian's wife about the proposed amendments to the Factories Act. He sat down. He stayed. He did not make a speech. He did not announce a thing. He simply sat beside her, in full view of the room, and the matrons, and the fathers, and the daughters, and the particular, merciless attention of London society, and the room understood, as London always understood eventually, what it was looking at. He means it. Marin did not look up from her conversation for 3 full minutes. When she did, she glanced at him. He raised an eyebrow. She turned back to the parliamentarian's wife. "As I was saying," she continued with perfect composure, "the amendment requires 3 signatures, and I believe we can obtain them before the summer recess if we approach the right people in the right order." London watched. London seethed. London, as it always did when the alternative was being left behind, eventually adjusted. Loveliest listener of the Ton. If there is something to learn from her, it is this. The rooms that were never meant for you are often the ones you were born to change, and the person who sees you clearly, who looks when the world has trained itself not to,
who says your name as though it matters, who sits beside you in full view of everyone who would prefer them elsewhere. That person is worth more than any title, any distance, any rule that was made before either of you arrived. Her name was Marin Ellis. She scrubbed floors and read philosophy, and told the truth in rooms that punished it. She never stopped.